Hello, and good afternoon. Welcome to the 2021 edition of Net at Work, one of the Martin Center's flagship events and Europe's premier gathering of center-right think tanks. My name is Theo LaRue, and I'll be hosting this year's broadcast. We've got something very special in store, with a grand total of 8 panel discussions spread over 4 days, involving the participation of 10 different Martin Center member foundations and the input and views of 24 experts. As always with Net at Work, the aim is to utilize the variety of speakers joining us to examine the breadth of issues facing Europe. Under the title, Preserving Our European House, Healing Our Societies, we aim to examine the many issues that predate COVID-19 and that require our commitment to address in the aftermath of the pandemic. Some of the topics we'll be exploring together include women and the future of Europe, the green transition, EU subsidiarity, and even matters of food security. As was the case of Net at Work's previous edition, this event will be held online with certain moderators and guests joining us here in the studio. You can follow the live stream on Facebook and our very own Martin Center website. You can also provide your input by asking any questions you might have in the comments section of our Facebook live stream. We also provide live coverage of the discussions on Twitter, where we will be posting important quotes from our speakers in real time. Please join the discussion online by using the hashtag #NetAtWork on all social media platforms. Finally, I'd like to extend a word of gratitude to our partners for this event from everyone at the Martin Center. The Konrad Adenauer Foundation European Office, the Hans Scheidel Foundation Brussels Office, and the Political Academy of the Austrian People's Party. And with that, I'd say it's about time we jump into it. I'm honored to introduce the president of the Wilfrid Martin Center for European Studies, Mikuláš Dzurinda, who will be joining us from Bratislava to deliver his opening remarks. President, over to you.
Thank you very much, Theo. Dear colleagues at the Martin Center Secretariat, dear colleagues from our member foundations, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, I sincerely welcome all of you to the next edition of our already traditional Net at Work event. There is no doubt we live in very, very turbulent times, facing a number of global challenges. The pandemic of COVID-19 still dominates them. The effort of our fellow citizens, but also political leaders, is focused on vaccination and other measures helping take pandemic under control, on easing and finally lifting restrictive measures, but also on economic recovery, on preserving existing and creating new jobs, and at the end on fiscal consolidation. But it is not only pandemic which occupies the political leaders and our citizens. We are concerned due to the Russian aggressiveness, centered not only on Ukraine, but also on the EU and its unity and stability. Just at the end of the last week, the Czech Republic has expelled 18 Russian diplomats who were not diplomats but spies. It has been a reaction on the explosion in the ammunition storage in Vrbětice, the Czech city, in October 2014, during which 2 people, the Czech citizens, died. There is a suspicion that the same 2 Russian agents that carried out the 2018 Salisbury poisoning were behind the crime. But it is not only Russia. Turkey and its activities in the Mediterranean deserve also our attention. We are focused on some positive agenda as well, on the Green Deal and its implementation, on revitalization of our transatlantic relations after presidential elections in the United States, but also on the cooperation with the United Kingdom after Brexit, but also on our European neighborhood, especially on the Western Balkans and countries of Eastern Partnership, with a special emphasis on Belarus and democratic uprising of its citizens. In a few weeks, the conference on the future of Europe starts. The Martin Center wants to actively participate in the event. We want to promote our ideas how to shape our common European house in the years to come. I would be delighted if our Net at Work event would encourage also you, our member foundations, but also individuals, to come up with your assessment and your proposals how to make the EU even stronger, more united, more competitive, less dependent, and more resilient. I believe that also our Net at Work discussions can bring inspiring ideas that can be used in this respect. We at the Martin Center realize that Europe is not only big, but also very, very diverse composition of regions and nations. Our regions, our member states, face also their own specific challenges that not seldom dominate regional or national politics. We wanted to bring these topics to Brussels in order to exchange views, but also to seek effective solutions, learning from each other and using individual experience in solving similar tasks. This is a basic idea or background of Net at Work event. Due to positive experience from the past, we have decided to make the event also in these specific conditions and circumstances, even though meeting in person would be much, much better. As in the past, we organized this event together with Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, Hans Seidel Stiftung, and Politische Akademie. I thank all three member foundations for their fantastic cooperation and effort. As Theo has already indicated, this year we have 8 panel discussions within 4 days. I am glad that we will discuss topics such as subsidiarity principle and its implementation in shaping the EU, the EU's renewed partnership with the southern neighborhood, transition to a smart green Europe, and the future of the middle class in these new conditions. But also the role and position of women in our European community, Sustainable Development Goal 3 and its challenge for EU public health policy. Last but not least, we will deal with food security and safe food. I want to thank all member foundations actively participating in the event, namely Hans Seidel Stiftung, Anton Tunega Foundations, Konrad Adenauer Stiftung Europe, Political Academy, Konstantinos Karamanlis Institute for Democracy, Francisco de Sá Carneiro, Luigi Sturzo Institute, Topaz, the Gasperi Foundation, and Anton Koroshets Institute. I sincerely thank all discussants and moderators of all 8 panels, but also my colleagues from the Martens Center Secretariat, at the helm with the mastermind of the event, Anna Nalivaiko, for making this conference possible. I wish us all inspiring debates. Thank you.
Thank you, President, for your inspiring contribution. We're going to now take a short break. We'll be back in 5 minutes for the first panel. Stay with us. Hello again. It's now finally time to kick off the first panel discussion of this year's Net at Work, organized in partnership with the Untitled Foundation, titled Strong Municipalities, Strong Europe. Don't forget, you can ask your questions for this panel on Facebook. To serve as moderator for this conversation, we are joined here in the studio by none other than Federico Ottavio Rejo, the strategic coordinator and a senior research officer at the Martin Center. Federico, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Theo, for your nice introduction. Hello, everyone. Welcome also on my behalf to this panel discussion organized by the Martin Center in cooperation with the Untitled Stiftung, the Brussels office of the Untitled Stiftung, on, I think, a very important topic, which is strong municipalities, strong Europe. And let me maybe introduce briefly the conversation that we are going to have. What did we think it was interesting? The organizers thought it was interesting to discuss essentially two things, I would say broadly. First, the importance of robust, empowered and engaged local governments and municipalities for the process of European integration, meaning how essential it is that this empowerment of local governments takes place and the engagement of local governments in the European integration process is intense. Second, and relatedly, the need for a bottom-up approach to European integration and legitimacy more broadly. And this is, of course, what is known in the EU jargon as subsidiarity. It is an important value in the EU treaties, and it is an important value of the Martin Center and the EPP. So why is this topical? Why is this relevant in the middle of a global pandemic? Why are we discussing this? And well, there are at least three reasons, very briefly, I think why this is important. First, because we are somehow mandated to do so by the EU treaties as modified by the Lisbon Treaty. Now, after the Lisbon Treaty, as you know, the role of local governments and municipalities has been strengthened in the EU multi-level governance. I'm not going to go into details there, but there have been efforts, important efforts, of which actually one of our speakers at least was part by the Juncker Commission to intensify the involvement of local governments in EU policy making. And more work remains to be done, and this is why, we thought it was interesting to discuss the matter today. A second reason is that, well, as the President mentioned before, we are at the eve of an important conversation in the framework of this conference on the future of Europe about essentially problems of EU effectiveness and legitimacy. And arguably, both issues, both EU effectiveness and EU legitimacy, pass from an empowerment, or can pass partly from an empowerment of local governments and authorities. And maybe a third aspect, well, this is a moment of intense transformation. There is a global pandemic going on, which is bringing about important changes in many EU policies. So there is a case to think how this is going to affect the shape, the institutional shape of the EU overall, but also its relationship with the local and the municipality level. Now, to have that conversation, we have two excellent speakers, which I am now going to introduce, and which, first of all, I would like to welcome on the platform. So, Astrid Freudenstein, welcome, Mayor of the city of Regensburg, and Reinhold Lopatka. So, let me just introduce them systematically, sort of. Astrid Freudenstein, as I said, is the mayor of the city of Regensburg from the CSU, the Christian Social Union, so the Bavarian member party of the EPP. She served before this position as a member of the German Bundestag from 2013 to 2017. She has dealt with a variety of policy areas, including some which are very important also at the local level, disability, for example, and transport policy. So welcome, Astrid Freudenstein. Thanks for being with us. And Reinhold Lopatka from the Austrian People's Party. He has had a very long experience of local politics in his native region, Styria first. Then he has had 2 stints in the national government as state secretary. Is now a member of the Austrian parliament, head of the Austrian delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. But perhaps most importantly for our discussion today, he was in 2018-2019, he was part of an important task force established by then President of the Commission, Juncker, on subsidiarity, proportionality, and doing less more efficiently, which also dealt with the empowerment and the engagement of local authorities in the European sort of institutional process. So welcome Reinhold Lopatka to the discussion.
Thank you for the invitation.
So, well, I would say without further ado, I propose that we move into the first part of the debate that will see some introductory thoughts by the 2 speakers, then an exchange on the panel with a couple of additional issues that we can discuss. But I propose to make this conversation as interactive as possible because, of course, we have many viewers who I'm sure will have plenty of things to ask. As Theo said, they are most welcome and even warmly encouraged to ask questions, write comments in the Facebook chat, and in the second part of the event we'll go back to that. So, well, I suggest then that I pass the floor to Astrid Freudenstein, if you agree first, for her introductory thoughts on the topic at hand.
Thanks a lot. I'm delighted to be a guest at this year's Net at Work event series and to give an opening talk for today's discussion panels. Our topic is Strong Municipalities, Strong Europe, and we want to shed light on the issues of federalism and subsidiarity in particular. Thank you for this event. It sheds light on a very important area of European politics. Some people may spontaneously ask themselves what relationships and interactions there are between big European politics and small local politics. Perhaps that really isn't immediately apparent, but I can tell you there is much more Europe in local politics than one would assume. And I'm also quite sure that good European politics must always keep an eye on the smallest unit, the city, the municipality, the village. I would like to illustrate this using my hometown as an example. I'm the mayor of Regensburg, you told. The city is located in Bavaria, has around 165,000 inhabitants from dozens of different nations. And Regensburg is located at the northernmost point of the Danube, a river that, as you know, flows through 10 different countries, from its source in Baden-Württemberg to its mouth in the Black Sea. We are twinned with 8 cities worldwide, and our companies export their goods throughout the European Unions. BMW, made in Regensburg, trips from Infineon, and so on. Regensburg has 3 institutions of higher education, a university with more than 20,000 students, a university of applied sciences with nearly 10,000 students, and a small but excellent college for Catholic church music, where people all over Europe teach and study in our 3 universities. Since Regensburg was the seat of the Perpetual Diet from 1663 to 1806, the present day is very consistent with our city's great European past. And because during this time, many things were put on the long bench or decisions were made at the green table, you can still visit the corresponding pieces of furniture in Regensburg today. What does the European here and now look like in a city such as Regensburg? About 2/3 of all decisions made in Brussels or Strasbourg concern our local level. For example, the directive on particulate matter meant that we had to introduce speed limits and new traffic regulations in our city, and we weren't really happy about that. In local elections, French, Greek, and Australian citizens, of course, now are also able to cast their votes. The city administration even has a separate position that deals with EU funding opportunities. And in the institutional structure, the local authorities are represented, sure, in the European Committee of the Regions and so on. Municipalities in Germany emphasize the right to local self-government, a proven principle that guarantees that decisions are made as close as possible to the citizen. Home should be made at home, I think so, very closely to the problems and needs of the people. That is the core of the subsidiarity principle. And as mayor, I see Europe's task in strengthening local authorities in their self-government. However, the municipalities have lacked opportunities to actively shape European legislation, I think. There are no well-established forms of participation. The principles of subsidiarity and connectivity have not yet been implemented in concrete terms. It's altogether desirable that more experienced local politicians be heard in Brussels or Strasbourg than in the past. And it's important that EU legislation be discussed in advance with cities and mayors and municipalities to get greater extent than in the past. So I look forward to the suggestions and to our discussion, and thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Astrid Freudenstein, for your point. And indeed, I had forgotten to mention that you are right. Regensburg was indeed the seat of the Imperial Diet for a long time, which was a sort of miniature parliament for Europe. So quite a fitting,
Yes,
sort of location to discuss the matter. I would like to ask now Reinhold Lopatka to give us his perspective, also in light of his engagement, well, at all levels, at the regional, at the national, and at the European level, with problems of subsidiarity. Reinhold, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Again, dear Mayor Astrid Freudenstein, dear Federico, and dear colleagues. Thank you for the invitation to talk with you about strong municipalities and strong Europe. I think a strong Europe needs the support of national, regional and local politicians, and strong municipalities, on the other hand, they need a strong umbrella like the EU could be. Having said that, I have to mention that it is my point of view that the EU credibility is suffering in the last years. First, we had the Euro crisis, then the influx of migrants, and now the pandemic. European citizens were not satisfied with the results and the work of the EU in managing this three crises, especially when it comes to COVID-19. The Commission has faced severe criticism for the slow vaccination rollout. According to recent trackers, less than 20% of our citizens have had their first jab so far, compared to more than 60% in UK and more than 50%, as I have heard today, of US citizens have had already their first jab. And if we look at the COVID-19 economy scorecard, the EU also lags behind. In the last quarter of 2020, the US were growing by 4.1%. China's growth rate was even higher, 6.5%. And I'm not speaking of the first quarter of this year. And our economy was still shrinking. So my point of view is that the EU Commission has to do everything to do a better job soon. If this will not happen, we will face the next crisis. I think a crisis of the European political system, which is losing confidence among EU citizens and also among national parliamentarians. Let me explain it. What do we need for a strong Europe? What can municipalities do here? What can national, regional politicians do? Do you need more democratic legitimacy? Mayors and regional parliamentarians have this legitimacy. We know it from all our surveys. They have it on a high level. The EU Commission, which is appointed and not elected, needs the support of national parliamentarians and regional entities, like municipality governments, in order to get more legitimacy. And the EU needs more transparency in all the phases of the legislative procedure to re-establish EU credibility. And what we also need is a stronger involvement of citizens, but also of politicians, and also of municipality councillors, as the mayor has mentioned it before. This is very important. But the reality is the opposite. The influence of national and regional parliamentarians was reduced year by year. I give you only two examples. On the EU level, now we have more and more EU regulations and less EU directives. In the year 2000, we had 16 regulations and 39 directives in 1 year. In 2017, we had already 52 regulations and only 14 directives. And in the last year, the number of regulations was exactly 46, and we had only 5 directives. Why do I mention it? Because only directives give national parliaments and regional legislative assemblies the chance to be fully involved in the lawmaking process. If we have regulations, national parliaments are not involved directly, which is a pity. And here, if you have more and more regulations, this development threatens the principle of subsidiarity and causes more centralism. And of course, we are on the way to an overregulation. A second example. The same happens with so-called delegated acts, which escape the competence to scrutinize subsidiarity. The number of delegated legal acts increased from 38 in 2012 to more than 100 in 2018 and to 125 in the last year. National parliaments and regions are not involved in this procedure. And with such delegated legal acts, the EU Commission intervene in national politics with far-reaching consequences, without any added value, as it should be. And on the other hand, we have a strong reduction of subsidiarity complaints from the national parliaments. National parliaments reduced their work to submit a reasoned opinion, a subsidiarity complaint, as it is called. In the year 2013, we had 83 of such complaints. In 2017, 48, and in 2018, only 43. In 2019, 0. Not even 1. And in 2020, we had only 12 of these complaints. This development is negative. Why is it? National parliaments have realized that the system with the so-called yellow card doesn't work properly. To say it very open and very frankly, so far there were no direct effects. Since we have this procedure on the outcome of a legal act, even if the yellow card threshold was reached, which is not easy. So let me conclude. I'm absolutely in favor of the European Union. But at the same time, I have to say, we could bring the EU much closer to the citizens by putting the principles of subsidiarity into effect in a more practical way as we do it now. The task force, as you mentioned before, on subsidiarity in 2018 already elaborated valuable recommendations in this regard, especially with a view to better involve regional and local levels. The final results were not as I would have liked to see them, but there were some concrete good ideas. Mayors and municipal council members should play, like national parliamentarians, a more important role. But looking at the conference, the future of Europe, which will start at the beginning of May this year, it confirms my skepticism. Subsidiarity is not a priority on the agenda. The Committee of the Regions is until now not invited to participate as a member of the Executive Board, and the national parliaments, they are only involved as an observer, but only with the 3 members of the COSAC Troika. So I always try to be an optimist, but speaking of the principle of subsidiarity and the daily work of the European Union, I am getting more and more pessimistic. Thank you.
Thanks, Reinhold. Very, very clear and punchy statements as always. Let me maybe pick up on something you said and ask you immediately a follow-up question. It is true, as you say, that the task force, the important task force of which you were part, established by Juncker and chaired by Vice President Timmermans at the time, did an excellent job in serving the problem. Yet, I mean, many of us, and we discussed it, the two of us discussed this in the past, so I suspect you agree, were relatively disappointed by the outcome, ultimately, of the task force, because the main practical recommendation was the embrace of an approach of what you call in the report active subsidiarity, essentially listening, engaging more national and local actors so that they know better what's going on and they can implement EU priorities and policies more readily at the local level. But many of us felt that this is a rather centralist approach to the problem of subsidiarity. It's not just about passing down certain priorities that have been agreed upon at the European level. It's the spirit of the principle goes bottom up. So it's about engaging the local level and accepting that legitimacy flows from it. So I ask you, Reinhold, you already gave us some concrete ideas, less directives, less regulation, and more directives. This is one of the things you implied. Less resort to delegated legal acts as a way to re-engage also national actors. Could you give us a blueprint of actions? What can be done? What needs to be done? What can be proposed also in view of the conference on the future of Europe?
One idea from the Austrian side was in this task force that you don't see the national parliaments, regional parliaments as opponents, to involve them more, to introduce a green card procedure, as I called it. It should be introduced to allow national parliaments to extend the political dialogue aimed at initiating new legislation, only initiating it, giving them this chance, or to make it easier, this proceeding of a yellow card. If we are honest, how we have it now, it has no effect. It doesn't work. Or to fight against overregulation, thinking about a system of one in, one out, which means that the Commission should only be allowed to make a new proposal if a proposal is also there to cancel an existing EU provision, which is made at the same time. We are in a competitive situation with the United States, with China. And this is the most important thing. We always forget economy is the most important thing. And we are losing, how I see it, more and more competitiveness. So we have to look at this processes of legislation. And for me, which is very important, you know, a subsidiarity pact should be adopted. What does I mean with it? And then I want to finish that Commission activities, you know, should be restricted to its working program and not starting with new initiatives. Really, over-regulation will be one of the biggest problems in the future if we want to get more competitiveness.
Thanks, Reinhold. Also for stressing the often overlooked role link between subsidiarity and competitiveness. We have a tendency to think of subsidiarity as an abstract legalistic concept, but the truth is that it is about reining in over regulation. It is about also fostering competition between regional, national governments, and therefore ultimately boosting competitiveness also in our ability to compete with non-European actors such as China and in the United States. I would like to go back to Astrid Freudenstein to pick her brains on this aspect. Because, I mean, let's face it, Astrid, if you look, I mean, you were saying it yourself, right? There are no well-established ways for involving municipalities at the moment in the EU legislative process. The latest data that I sort of was looking at also in preparation for this event were quite abysmal. It has been calculated that if you combine all of the feedback mechanisms that are available in the European Union, and this was also in the report, in the 2018 report, less than 1% come from local and regional authorities. So the degree of engagement of local and regional authorities, let alone municipalities, is very, very low. So I guess the question imposes itself from the perspective of a mayor. What can be changed? What can be improved? What would you feel are interesting suggestions that, for example, the conference on the future of Europe should keep in mind to tackle this issue?
Yes, I think we need to talk to each other a lot more. Like today in town halls, there is often a big fear of big European politics. It's all very far away, and so it's often very difficult. On the part of the municipalities, it would be good if there's a permanent contact person, maybe for European matters. Maybe this would be important.
Okay, thank you very much, permanent contact person following municipalities. We are getting a lot of concrete ideas here, so that's always good. So I would like to now put on the table another issue, which again was also part of that report, but that has not come up until now. And it is the issue, and I go back to Reinhold, the issue of redelegations. And this is an issue that has now been swept under the carpet. But one of the core demands that the president of the commission at the time had asked you, Reinhold, and others in this task force was to reflect whether there would be some areas of EU policy that could be usefully redelegated in part or totally to the national, regional, and local level. And the report too reached a rather negative conclusion. I don't know whether that was a unanimous conclusion. Basically, the point was there is European added value in all areas of EU policy making, so there is no need for any redelegation. That might be so. I have the impression that now there is even the opposite tendency. The mood in Brussels seems to be that we need to shift further decision-making powers to the European level on issues like health, like social policy, like environmental policy. So, in fact, the opposite of that sort of agenda seems to be succeeding. So, my question to you is: how do you see? Is this sort of conversation closed? Or is there a case for reopening it in view of the conference for the future of Europe, maybe a possibility of reopening it?
It's a good question. The problem is that all the three institutions on the European level, especially the Parliament and the Commission, they have no interest that strong national politicians, strong mayors, take the floor and are involved on the same level as they. So the problem is there is how I see it, a silent but strong transformation from the local level, from the national level to Brussels. And speaking of subsidiarity, where there is added value, I'm in favor of this. We are weak where we should have a stronger European policy. Speaking of security, speaking of foreign policy, here we are weak. But on the other hand, the EU Commission tries to get more influence using, for example, delegated legal acts to get involved in social policy, in labor market policy, where there's no competence on the European level. And we should also talk about it where maybe there is a legislation now on the European level to bring it back to the national level. Speaking, for example, of the protection of nature, or of all the legislation which has to do with the soil, with how the development is in a city area. I think a mayor is much closer to the citizens, and the people, they know it much better in Regensburg how they want to organize their life there without an influence from the or an interruption intervening from Brussels. And now we have this Green Deal. I think and I hope that we will not have regulations from the European level how we should organize, for example, the traffic on the local level. And what I want to say is we should make Europe stronger with more competencies, but then they should use it. To give you an example, now in this health crisis, in pandemic, coordination for me, this was the competence of the European level. But I was waiting for a coordination, especially last March, there was no coordination. Or now, as I mentioned, UK and the United States, and I compare Europe. I want to see Europe as number one and not in the third place when I look at the vaccination, which is very important for our health, but also for our economy. And each week we lose because we were not able to buy vaccines like it was possible in UK and like it is now in the United States. We are far behind it. So here we should think what should be done on the European level. And then we should give all competences here to the European level, but then we should reduce the influence of the European Commission in fields where they are involved now. And we should restart this discussion. It was refused to do it now in this conference on the future of Europe. It's not on the agenda. I don't see it. I have read all the priorities there. I cannot find anything where we can really start this discussion, but we can do it on the party level. All these political institutions which are involved in this network, it is also their task, I think, to do it.
Absolutely, Reinhold. And to an extent, I mean, we are already doing it because we are discussing here in public on on such issues from such a perspective. I understand that there are some questions from the viewers, but before I go to that, I would like to ask maybe Astrid if you agree with Reinhold that there would be many areas where maybe a mayor would be in a better position to decide than the whole apparatus of the European Union, and which are those areas? How do you see it?
Yes, I completely agree with Raimund. We are very near at our citizens, and we don't need any interruption from European politics for regulation of our traffic. And so, yes, I completely agree. Yes, sure.
Thanks. Okay, I think we are now ready to take some questions from our viewers, some comments also from our viewers. So I would like to ask Theo if he has received any.
Thank you, Federico. Indeed, we have. And the first question is as follows. To implement the principle of subsidiarity, should municipalities and local institutions call for a more powerful role of the Committee of the Regions in the EU legislative framework? So that's question number one. And the second question is, what can legislators at municipality level do to ensure their concerns are respected and acted upon by the Commission?
Okay. Thanks, Theo. I think we have partly answered the second question. I mean, there were many already proposals or ideas on how the sort of municipality local level could be engaged at the European level. But of course, if our speakers have other ideas, they are most welcome to contribute them. And indeed, very, very good point on the Committee of the Regions, because of course there is an institution, as we know, in the EU sort of setup, which is already formally mandated from representing the interest of regional and local governments, and that is the Committee of the Regions. Of course, we know that it doesn't have full legislative status. It's not a co-legislator or anything. But maybe I will start from Astrid. Feel free to share with us whatever thoughts you have on these two questions. Other ideas on how to make your voice as a local politician and administrator better heard in Brussels, but also how do you interact with the Committee of the Regions, and do you think there is a scope for strengthening the Committee of the Region in the EU legislative framework?
I don't really know how to make it better. We do not have many relationship to the European institutions in our daily work here in Town Hall. That's very far away. We have a relationship with Deutscher Städtetag, Bayerischer Städtetag, and so it's their part, I think so, to communicate to the European level.
Okay, thank you. So, Reinhold, what about you? What do you think? Is there a scope for strengthening the Committee of the Regions in some ways? What else can be done?
I think there are two ways if you really want to involve the municipality level. One level is, of course, using the Committee of Regions. This committee is very important, but as I mentioned before, it's not involved as it could be, for example, now in preparing this conference of the future of Europe. We say we want to bring Europe closer to the citizens. The mayors are the closest politicians to the citizens, and we don't involve them speaking of the executive board. So one thing. The second thing is many mayors are in legislative assemblies. For example, in Bavaria, I'm sure mayors are also in the Bayerischen Landtag, in the Bavarian state legislative assembly. Others, like here in Austria, they're in the national parliaments. So if you give a stronger position also to the national parliaments in this legislative procedure, you are strengthening the municipalities. That's the question, because you don't have mayors in the European Parliament, and of course you don't have mayors in the European Commission, but you should involve them. They are the politicians, I'm sure, with the highest numbers of confidence of all politicians. And we should use this for the European Union, but we don't do it.
Actually, the latest polls I have seen on this topic, if I remember correctly, said 21% of Europeans declared their trust in national governments, while 45% on average said that they trusted regional and city governments. So not only vis-à-vis EU institutions, but even vis-à-vis their national governments, the difference is significant. It's important. Look, let's come to another issue. I mean, the third point that I mentioned in my introduction, right? And that's the fact that the EU is, like the world in some ways, in the middle of a process of transformation. And already, you know, since the beginning of COVID-19, many things have changed. Many freedoms in many ways have been restricted. New structures have been created at the European level. There is a talk now about centralizing potentially health policy further. More broadly, we have also created a massive, recovery plan that will change also probably the way Europe interacts with the national and local level. So I guess my question for you, and maybe I will start with Reinhold and then go to Astrid, is what are the key things to watch that are changing, that can change in the relationship between the European Union and the regional and local level over the next few years? How will COVID and the process of transformation that we are experiencing, but also the global context, right? The new confrontation with China, the uncertain prospects with the United States. How does all this translate in terms of the relationship between the European Union and the local level? Are we going to see more centralization? Do we need more centralization? Or are we going to see the reopening of spaces, as you were saying?
Okay. I think Europe should be concentrated on the big questions. You mentioned China. I'm sitting here in Strasbourg. We have a meeting of the Council of Europe, of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. Here are the members also Turkey and Russia. And we discuss tomorrow with the German Chancellor Angela Merkel this issue, how to deal with Turkey and Russia. So the EU is not Europe in the whole. Europe is more, because a part of Turkey and a part of Russia are also part of Europe. We should not forget it. And we should not forget these struggles we have with our neighbors. But we have these neighbors and we have to work with them. So here we should strengthen the European Union. And really, we should work that not national governments are here the front runner. Here we should have a strong Europe. On the other hand, the European Union should think about it not to act as they did in the last years. I mentioned this high number of regulations. I mentioned these delegated acts, where they exclude the national and regional legislation. And believe me, that doesn't strengthen the European Union. If we really want to bring the European Union closer to its citizens, we have to be strong in our security and foreign policy and the protection of the citizens. One thing, this has to be done on the European level, more than it is done now. But on the other hand, the European Union should think about it, how can we involve more the legislation processes on the regional and on the national level.
Thanks, Reinhold. I mean, you know that this is also a core concern of ours, and we will continue, of course, to look into these matters. Astrid, what is your take on these sort of mega trends in the relationship between the EU and the local level?
Yes, strengthen the European level in big issues, sure, but no overregulation of issues of regional issues. We are very near to our citizens, and we don't need help in managing traffics, in managing social or environmental issues on our regional level. And so I think there is a need of more communication between the levels, and we should be aware of our regulation, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I believe we probably have to bring it to a close because the clock is ticking. I am not going to bore people with long conclusions because I think the discussion was very rich. There were particularly a lot of interesting, ideas that can be usefully reflected upon and then maybe suggested even within the framework of the conference on the future of Europe. I mentioned some of them. A preference for directives over regulations. The two have basically become interchangeable. They are directives these days are as detailed almost as regulations. So this, of course, limits the space for national and local engagement. But also the possibility of moving to a green card procedure from the yellow card that we already have, sunset clauses on EU regulations, one in, one out, and so on. Many ideas were mentioned. Let me just say maybe two things as a conclusion. The first is subsidiarity is not about legalistic discussions or even abstract philosophical debates. It is ultimately about the fact that political order constructs itself from the bottom up, and at the root of it, the repository of all rights is the individual citizen and its immediate community, the immediate community that surrounds it, from the local level to the European level. So ultimately, it is the bedrock of any well-functioning political system, of any well-functioning democracy, especially a multi-level democracy like the EU. Second point, as we said at several junctures, if the Conference on the Future of Europe has to seriously tackle problems of EU effectiveness and EU legitimacy, well, there is no better place to start than the local level, because EU effectiveness is primarily built in the daily implementation of rules at the level closest to the citizens, but also, as all polls show us, this is the level that enjoys the highest degree of trust. So if we don't get these people involved in the European project, to pass down also the meaning and the message of it, we will not tackle the problems that the Conference on the Future of Europe is meant to tackle. So I thank you both very much, Astrid and Reinhold, for your excellent contribution. I thank all viewers for their interest, and well, stay tuned because we will certainly discuss these topics further in future Martin Center activities.
And thank you to our panelists for providing us with such a great conversation. Don't forget to mention your impressions and thoughts on all social media using the hashtag #NetAtWork. For now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to take a quick break and get ready for the next panel on EU subsidiarity. See you all at 5 o'clock.